Hello, this is Christina Codgill with the Radiant Astrology Podcast, and today we're going to be discussing Uranus and Pluto. We're specifically going to be delving into the trine of Uranus and Pluto that we experienced a little bit earlier this year in 2025 in the sign of air, with Uranus going into Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. And then we'll be experiencing more of it into 2026. And with me to discuss this revolutionary transit is the astrologer S.J. Anderson, who I'm a huge fan of. I love watching his YouTube channel. He really brings in a lot of insight into what's going on with the planets. And I'm super honored that S.J. has agreed to join me today on the podcast. Welcome, S.J. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Christina, for having me. Great to be with you. Awesome to get to talk about this transit and just to be on the cusp of 2026, such a big year, and especially with the outer planets. It's a major, major, major year. And I'm just so excited about 2026, especially as an astrologer, because, for us, so much of what we follow and in particular, the contemporary astrological discourse and even like modern discourse, which became so outer planet focused, like this is the year for all of that to really show itself. Another year, maybe 2020 was one as well because of the Pluto Saturn conjunction in 2020. But we get so much happening this next year that it's just a pleasure to get to talk to you about it today. So thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure of mine. I feel like when I watch your channel, like I think I've said to you before, I feel like I'm there with you, like in your living room, because you have such a great, personal way of bringing it into discussion. Because as we were saying before we start recording, this is what we think about all the time as astrologers. So it's so nice to be able to kind of bounce ideas off of one another. And before we delve in, can you just give a little introduction of yourself to listeners who maybe aren't familiar with your work?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a professional astrologer. I've been practicing professionally full time for about 5 years now. Probably coming into I'll complete my sixth year this year. Before that, I was an avid enthusiast, you might say. UAC in 2018. That's the United Astrology Conference for everybody listening. The kind of Super Bowl for astrology. So I took a course with Chris Brennan in 2016, completed that work then. So I've been around for a while, coming up to on kind of my 10 years, like as a heavy astrologer with 5 years of professional practice. I would say, what else should people know about me? I'm on YouTube, so that's a big part of how I practice. Actually, I think about it that way because there's a dialogue with the larger world about astrology that I'm engaged in on a regular basis. So that's fun. I'm on Instagram. I've been doing more short content over there. So social media content creation around astrology, and then I do see clients, quite a bit of clients. It's been a big part of my practice too, is reading for people, which I love to do. But that's the short of it. I guess the only other thing I would say is that I do have a Hellenistic training. I mentioned Chris Brennan earlier, and so I'm heavily influenced by a lot of the ancient astrological, particularly the Hellenistic models. At the same time, I love Dan Rudhyar. I love the humanist schools. I love the New Age spirituality. I'm kind of coming out of that. Grateful Dead, that little bit of a Deadhead when I'm in my youth. I mean, so I love it all, kind of. But technically, I'm more Hellenistic. Qualitatively, and how I delineate is just more, New Age, you might say, as much as I can bring that in.
Well, that's great. I love that you have a Hellenistic approach, but that you also really focus on the outer planets. That might be more of a thing now. I remember there was a time when Hellenistic astrologers just ignored the outer planets because they weren't, in the ancient texts. And I'm like, wait, but we know that they're there and they're happening to us. So to be able to have that perspective, have a more sort of holistic approach, I think is amazing. And the outer planets for me, sometimes these days I don't, look at every little planet every single day. I kind of look at more big picture, especially when it comes to the turning of the year, because we want to know, what can we maybe not expect, but prepare for, but just like mentally and emotionally kind of attune to? And so that's one of the things I love about your work. It's really helping people to attune to what may be coming. And even when, the planets, we kind of know and trust that there is something maybe bigger than us. And it's not about outsmarting them, right? It's about learning to attune to them and maybe what the lessons might be that they're bringing. So I'm wondering, now that we want to really kind of zero in on these planets. Pluto is so, transformational on a collective and personal level, but we really feel it once it is entering a new sign, which it did in Aquarius. It's been a couple of years now, but it still is just hovering in these early degrees. And then, Uranus is another absolute game changer. And now that they're having this conversation, even as like we speak now, we've got, yeah, Pluto's at 1 degree Aquarius. Uranus is retrograde and has just recently re-entered Taurus. So, they're only a few degrees away from a trine, even though Uranus is back in Earth sign. So before we kind of go on to the whole trine in air, what are your kind of thoughts about this transit that we've experienced of Uranus going through Taurus? I know that, with Taurus being like where we kind of expect to have stability, and where maybe even we can be complacent, I guess, because we seek that ground beneath our feet. And Uranus has, in many ways, it's there to shatter things, to shatter our expectations, to break things free. What are some of the thoughts that you've had that have sort of evolved over this like 8 or so year transit?
Yeah, great contemplation. And it is always useful when you have this transition period with Uranus right now back into Taurus, but having been in Gemini for a few months this year, it's always great to reflect and just say, okay, well, first of all, when did it begin? And the ingress of Uranus into Taurus was 15 May 2018, the first one. The final one was 6 March 2019. So, when I do this, I put myself back into 2018 and 2019, into 2018, beginning of 2019, and I say, okay, well, what has been altered? Clearly, just using those dates around the themes you describe. And I love what you said about where we expect it to be stable or we expect it to maybe stay similar. The support we have that we think we can rely on, something like this would be Taurus. And my number one thing on the list is, and this is going to come up all through this video, but it's the digital move that society has taken since that time on the one hand, and Uranus does represent that technology. It's one of the key or core significations of Uranus. So the increasing kind of ever-present, ubiquitous, the saturation of digital media and the digitization of reality that seems to have been a part of Uranus and Taurus, because you remember it comes in 6 March 2019. Well, what happens within the year? COVID lockdowns and the kind of forced acceleration of that digitization. I call it the Zoom years in 2020, 2021. Now, as astrologers, we're on Zoom all the time, but a lot of people I talk to are like, oh, I was just using Zoom during that time, and then they maybe don't use it as much anymore. So real quick, that's on the one hand is how and we can explore that fully, but the two main things I see is that. And then the second thing is the geopolitical zone, because fixed Earth sign Taurus can often be about how countries are settled with each other in terms of their relationships. It's a Venus ruled sign, so we know it's like our fixed relationships of support or something like this. To have Uranus come to Taurus, I think shakes up for what the kinds of associations countries have between each other. And we saw that in 2022 when the events in Ukraine took place, where Russia has this special military operation, is what they call it. The rest of the world calls it Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion. And that really shakes the world. It shakes the flow of goods and services, where had oil being sold out of Russia in different and new ways, where China has to prepare for shocks, potentially, if there are other threats to the global economy in terms of chips and things like that. And I'll stop here in a second, but you saw that recent news headline with China restricting some of the exports of these rare earth metals that are key to, the digital computer battery economy. So I think, and that matches, by the way, the lead up to World War II, the last time Uranus was in Taurus, where you had, Anschluss, I think that was what they call it. I can't pronounce that. But, Nazi Germany goes into Austria, and there's like the setup. And then actually the invasion of Poland happens with Uranus and Taurus. So those are the two things I'm looking at. And let me just say it differently. The first point is that the pleasure is Taurus, the expected pleasures. And I think about this as like media and how we communicate relationally. And that gets changed with the digital. So people are more online now. They're getting more of their pleasures from their phone or something like this, way more than from, for example, 2012 to 2018, which was Uranus and Aries. I think roughly, or no, that would have been 2010 to 2018, but it's like an acceleration of that. So anyhow, go ahead, Christina. I don't mean to hijack this stuff, but there's a lot to say, as you can see, and there's a lot to kind of suss out here.
Yeah, and the other thing that I was thinking of when it comes to the sort of geopolitical rearrangements was the Brexit vote was in 2016. That was very much Uranus and Aries. There was this sudden out of nowhere, there's some people starting to think in the UK, they didn't want to be part of Europe anymore. And that caused a lot of strife, in the country. And then it succeeded in 2020. I think it was January 2020 is when it actually took place.
Yes.
And so it was that in that transition period of Uranus through Taurus Uranus and Aries into Taurus. And, it's only been in the past, because I look at a lot of UK news outlets. Because I just love how they're written. And sometimes I need a break from what's happening here in the US.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's only been this year. It's only been in the past several months that people are widely actually agreeing on, both ends of the spectrum that Brexit was a mistake.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of people who were Remainers, quote unquote,
Mhm.
but they're starting to say, to finally look back and say, why did we do this? And it didn't serve us. And it did, at least that's what I'm reading. Um,
Yes.
and so it's interesting when we look at now that we're wrapping up, a time of that transit of Uranus and Taurus, how have these rearranged or these breaks from, the traditional geopolitical order, like the New World Order, we're already feeling that New World Order has been really accelerated this year, especially with, in the US, their new administration has really been driving that. And then I love also what you said, like on a personal level, because we also, I love to bring it down to like, what does this mean for me in my personal life and everyday life? And that, Taurus can tend to be the spectrum of, I tend to see it as everything from ultimate like luxury and indulgence on one end to poverty conscious and lack of having, and the survival anxiety of actual survival. And there's been a lot of times through history where Uranus through Taurus correlated with times of mass migration because of either some kind of survival need, which I think we've also
Yes.
seen during this time. So go ahead. I don't know if you have anything you wanted
Yeah.
to continue to say.
I do. I do. I want to keep talking about this, but I know I don't want to, this is like a whole show if we wanted to, but I was going to say, yeah, I love that. And I think you're very astute there as you're pointing out about the UK, because I've seen that too recently, actually, in the media where people are like, hey, Brexit was sold to accomplish these things, and now they're taking inventory, however many years in, and saying, wow, we not only did we not accomplish that, but it got worse, and so they're like, this didn't even work for like the goals of the Remainers, let alone the people that wanted to stay. Obviously, there's visa problems and there's all kinds of issues that it created that people are now living in the aftermath of it with. I wanted to come back though and say, yeah, I mean the Dust Bowl that in the 30s, I'd like to go back and research when the peak of that migration was in America, but I think some of it was definitely probably Uranus and Taurus in the 1930s. So that's interesting. I'm wondering about our current time, and I think like nomadism, and I go back to the digitization where people can move freely. And I know for me during those years, I mean, I was settled in my home city of Austin, same apartment for a long time, same job, and that Uranus and Taurus, I was a nomad for a lot of it, and ended up where I live now in Albania, but. So I relate to that as you were saying that in terms of the personal life. Let's see. There was one other thing I wanted to say was the Trumpism. Yeah, Trumpism. I think we could throw that out here because if you just view the Uranus cycle through the zodiac, that's what's interesting about these three signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini. This is the beginning of the zodiac, and so in some sense, there's the idea of like a birth of something, Uranus and Aries, then we're trying to kind of, I don't know, adjust or fix around whatever was born in Taurus. And then now we come to Gemini and it may get even crazier, right? Because it's the mutable air sign. But I think Trumpism and Brexit could, yeah, Uranus and Aries, like here's the new passionate freedom, loving discourse. Now it comes to Taurus and you try to implement it and you're trying to change the structure around what was birthed. And you're like, okay, wow, this, did work or didn't work. And now we get to Gemini where, I'll say this and I don't mean it. And I could probably find another phrase if I pause, but all hell breaks loose. And I don't really mean that, hopefully not literally, but just that there could be a little bit more of a chaotic turn. Gemini is a mutable sign, air is dispersive, and it's a little bit hard to grasp, I think, in Gemini. But look back in the early 1940s, it's a similar idea where they were trying to keep the world together. It was actually the same, I think. It was Uranus and Aries was the rise of Hitler, wasn't it? And FDR. I mean, that was we'd have to get the dates up, but then Uranus and Taurus was the like attempt to kind of keep all that together. And then when Uranus comes to Gemini, it kind of really goes into what it will rearrange into when Uranus finally enters Cancer. And that's the post-World War II order. So anyhow, I'm thinking about it like that as you talked about Brexit. That's what, got me thinking about it in this way. And we'll have to just see how it goes. One other quick thing is that, yeah, I think Taurus being how we relate, how we find pleasure, luxury or even simple pleasures. And I don't know about you, but do you find you're spending more time on your phone, with Uranus and Taurus? Is that true for you too? Or like more time online or what's that
I
like?
For me personally, so it's my fifth whole sign house is Taurus.
Okay.
And, I have definitely noticed in my own life, like that, like how has it been affect me for the fifth house? So I'm a uh, sun and rising, Capricorn sun rising, right?
Oh, cool.
And so I, I remember whenever anybody would ask me, like, so what do you do for fun? And I would always say, like, I literally don't do anything for fun.
Yeah.
I literally, I guess I just always feel like I have to be doing something like work related, like at all times. And with Uranus going into Taurus, I remember in 2018, I finally took like like a legit vacation for the first time and I don't know how long. And then since then, I have actually been taking like legit vacations, like every year since then. So I'm a little worried about what might happen when it goes back. Hopefully it'll be integrated with me. I don't know. And I don't just leave it behind. But that's one thing. I think the digitization part of it, like I spend, if I'm not watching your astrology videos, then I'm watching travel
Thank you.
videos.
Yeah.
And I'm watching, like, I will sit there, and this for me even started in the pandemic. I would be like, okay, if I can't go anywhere, then I'm just going to get a baguette and like some brie cheese and watch videos on traveling Paris or traveling France. And then once we could go, I was, I'm always planning a vacation or just coming back from a vacation, trying to sort out my photos. I have though in this past year, and I don't know, I'll have to look if it's correlated to Uranus just dipping its toe into Gemini. I have tried to take apps off of my phone and they will be off my phone for, weeks or so before I absolutely have to, put them back on because I need to share something to my stories or whatever. And to me, that's helped for my mental health. And I also feel like that Uranus in Gemini, I also have Mars in Gemini in the sixth house. So I feel like that Uranian energy can really get amped up too much for me, in my physical world, but also with my mental,
Yeah.
sifting through, flitting through this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, oh, I meant to just check Instagram for a minute and now I just wasted 2 hours, or something like that. So I have been trying to make that like a intentional conscious thing. And I have seen more and more movements. I actually just saw yesterday a thing where they said the new luxury is privacy, and that it's actually cooler to have like less than 500 followers on Instagram or something like that. And I don't know if that's that movement into, like that. I feel like that might be that transition, because the transition of Uranus into Taurus was the opposite. It was like the more followers, the more scaling you're doing and blah, blah, blah. And I'm wondering if this could be one potential symbol of that transition outward.
Yeah, I love that. Wow, I'm really happy we're talking about this today. I didn't expect us to quite go here. This is the beauty of having just conversations with astrologers, because you never know where it's going to go, and you uncover really interesting phenomenon. But this is exactly what I've thought about with Uranus and Taurus, because I released one quick video about it, and I was thinking about this. Just it wasn't as long as we're going to talk about it here today, but that's so right. I mean, it was like grow the followers, Uranus and Taurus, and then now as we're shifting, I think some of it may be the parting gifts or the reflections that, a planet through a sign is going to help us reach a conclusion, is my experience. I mean, there's a working through that area that the planet then is kind of depositing its final conclusions, or its parting gift, is what a lot of us say. And that might be some of the parting gift of Uranus and Taurus, is like, all right, hey, your relationships. What I was going to say is that a lot of my relationships are online, because I'm online. People know me from online. A lot of my whole professional life is online, but even my friends back home and my family, like everything is through this phone now, way more than it ever was. And that was a part of my Uranus and Taurus. And as it's completing now, I've just done over the last 2 months. Part of this was, I guess, Saturn back into Pisces. I'm trying to do, I think, and let me just say this here: a lot of cycles are doing this right now. And I think what you're describing is also as much Neptune in Aries, Saturn in Aries, as it is Uranus finishing out its time in Taurus and entering Gemini, because a lot of that is kind of waking up from the dream of social media, which might be the more Piscean, and coming into like back into real life, or waking back up, or something like Neo from the Matrix. And that's the Aries energy, with Saturn and Neptune and Aries meeting in February. But just to say, I've just been doing a digital fireball, is what they call it. And I didn't even come to that without, and was with the help of some AI, just to be clear. That's a whole thing that's going to be part of this milieu of events that are emerging. But I was like talking to the AI. I was like, I need some help. I'm overwhelmed. So many emails, so many messages, and you probably have seen, and I like have these auto responses that it just helps me manage the overwhelm of being online and having so many DMs effectively and emails. So I'm definitely feeling that in my personal life. Like, how can I manage this? Like, how can I make it work for me, or something like this? And anyhow, go. I know I brought in the Saturn Neptune there, but I do think that's relevant with this with social media, as we think about it here in 2025, 2026.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a whole other layer to all of this. And especially with astrology, I've seen, I mean, I became an astrologer in 2011, essentially. Well, I officially started my business in like 2013, but 2011 was when I started really taking it more seriously. So, and that's Neptune entering
And
Pisces.
Pisces, yeah, yeah,
So,
Neptune and Pisces,
which
yeah.
it's interesting, because I always thought to myself, "Oh, I'm more of a scorpionic, plutonic type of astrologer, evolutionary astrologer, and blah blah blah." But now looking back, I'm like, there's an element, because I use it for healing, for helping people, access their spirituality, or healing, or the very Neptunian things. So it definitely, has a Neptunian sort of path to it in my life, and I think in the collective. So that's another thing I'm interested in looking at when Neptune and Saturn get back into Aries. How will that affect astrology? I see astrology being very, Neptunian, but also Uranian. So I expect, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on in in the astrology community so much this year because, I have other interests and things I'm pursuing, but I feel like that's something we need to notice because there's got to be a big shift here. I do feel like it's gone from being a healing thing, like, oh, let's use it for healing and blah blah blah, to being like, what is this telling me about the world? What is this telling me about this crusade, Neptune and Aries, that this fiery, passionate crusade, or even practical things where I can like get going in my life. I did notice sort of a little bit of a transition there. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is great, and I think for me, I'm not as keyed into the astrology community. I think this is some of the I mean, I am. I mean, I talk to astrologers. I do, podcasts with astrologers. I follow astrologers online. Instagram's great for that, isn't it? Because all my friends, like, I get to see their content there, and I don't have to, as watch as much of a long video or something. You can just get those shorter clips. I like that, and that might be some of Uranus and Gemini. I feel like a lot of the content creation with Uranus and Gemini has come into more short form. I mean, this is just the last few months. I know I've been making more short form, and I see a lot of people I used to see on X Twitter that I see them now in videos, making little videos, and I'm like, oh, cool, yeah, this is great. So, but I do think the Piscean is a collective energy. It's a collective interconnectedness, and I think with Neptune and Pisces, it did support a kind of there were like rock stars on social media, like only a few YouTube channels existed in the astrology world. I mean, this is the rise of YouTube in a certain way, not the beginnings of YouTube, but YouTube certainly takes over the media with Neptune and Pisces, where you basically have to be on it. I mean, where we are now, I just saw, what show was it? Oh, The Mountain Astrologer. This is a magazine that when Neptune entered Pisces, I used to read that at my grocery store in Austin, Texas, Wheatsville Co-op. Shout out to Wheatsville, but they would have it there. I would go through the line, I would grab the magazine, and I would read it every month. And now I see they're on Substack now, like they're coming to the new media. And I think that's happened with even a lot of TV and news programs, like even The Tonight Show and things like that. It's all about their Instagram clips. I watch Jimmy Fallon not because I watch his show. I see him sometimes on my social media. I'll see little clips and stuff. So I think that's a huge part of what we're getting into with the transition of Neptune into Aries. And this does fit with Uranus into Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. And let's just say this here, because it's, yes, we're going to talk about the trine today. And yes, we kind of started with that. But the thing about 2026 is that you have a completion of these three outer planets moving into what we call the masculine axis in astrology, or the outer daytime axis of Aries, which is an outer world sign, and Gemini, which is an outer world sign, and Aquarius, which is an outer world sign, meaning it's more about like implementing things, new structures and the flow of commerce and of how, we engage with others in the outer world kind of idea. And so just to come back, I think that all of these transitions are supporting this move to what was I just saying there? Short form content, but I think it's more just individualized. That's Aries. Like I don't know about you, but there's just a lot of astrologers now everywhere. I mean, so many new ones and so many people I've never met and stuff. And I think we're entering into an age where it's just these kind of personalized expressions that we're able to do and then engage with the whole world. So anyway, I got lost there. I think I lost my thread there maybe, but
Oh,
those
not
are
at
just some
all.
additional thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm following. Um,
Yeah.
but,
Excellent.
I feel like also, I was gonna say something, maybe it'll come back to me. So we got, so we talked about the wrapping up, the parting gifts of Uranus in Taurus, transitioning, so it's gonna be going back into Gemini in, you said April 2026 or something like that,
Yes.
springtime?
26 April in the UTC zone on that day. Hmm.
And so, so we still have some more time for those parting gifts, but I think it's worthwhile to see because it's still within, just like a degree or so of Gemini. It's still within a trine with Pluto. I did want to kind of throw one thing out at you. It's like because I did have a discussion about this during the summit that I hosted this summer, where we talked about the air trine of Pluto trine Uranus in Aquarius and Gemini, respectively. I personally, when I think of Pluto, any aspect with Pluto to me, is Pluto's, that metamorphosis quality, the elimination, and then even sometimes that, the destruction or those toxic elements coming out. Even in a trine, I feel like it's not easy, because that's just not the nature of Pluto is easy. It can be empowering, there's that disempowerment into empowerment, the death that leads to rebirth kind of thing. Because the nature of a trine is supposed to be Jupiterian, it's supposed to be flowing, things like that. But you have these big power players, Uranus also. Uranus is big. It's lightning, it's Prometheus and things like that. So just the nature of those two in a trine. Um, I don't know if it's always. I think we need to look at it. It's not like, say, Jupiter and Venus in a trine, or or the Sun and the Moon in a trine, or whatever. It's these are two major planets that can really suggest that there are things that could just really even blow our minds that we're not you know, we might not even be in our minds. Partially, of course, AI. We all think AI because of the technology sort of inherent in this, the air signs and these planets and things like that. Um, and yeah, what are your thoughts about the trine aspect and how we can sort of approach that to understand it more?
Yeah. It's interesting, and I love that this is where we're going with it, because I think this is where you get into some of the aspect theory or how we conceptualize aspects outside of this context, and then we can bring it back in. But my favorite way to look at aspects is simply delineating each node of an aspect first. And that's going to take up most of the work, isn't it? Because, I mean, that's a whole thing. There's a Uranus and Gemini. There's a symbolic delineation. There's the historical cycle side of it, just that alone. And then you have the Pluto and Aquarius version, the historical, the timing, all of it. And so once you've done that, then you can kind of say, how are those going to communicate, and just leave it more like that rather than to say the communication has to be one way or another. Because what that does is it incorporates the trine already, because the one way to look at aspects, and this is my preferred way, the Ptolemaic way, is that aspects relate to affinities based on element for a lot of the aspects, or for other affinities between signs. And so when we look at, just to quickly do it, like very short here, when you look at Uranus and Gemini historically, and in the current preview that we've just had, it can often be about communication upgrades, the way that things can maybe destabilize around the new technologies of communication. So, for example, you had Tom Paine and the printing press during the Revolutionary War. That invention then created a little bit of chaos. I mean, if you've looked into some of this, like they were writing very powerful ideas and then able to disseminate those very fast, and it created kind of resistance and discord. In the Civil War photography, I mean, you saw these photographs of dead soldiers, and I'm sure there's other layers to that, but I think that helped wake people up in certain ways, and maybe freedom became a big theme during that period, both in Russia and America. There was in Russia the emancipation of the serfs, and of course in America the Emancipation Proclamation was a result of Uranus and Gemini. And I think some of that probably had to do with, I don't know, I'm guessing photography, but that might be too much of a leap. I'd like to do more research on that. But um, but you're already looking at a technological outcropping just with Uranus and Gemini. And so when you come to then Pluto and Aquarius, and you look at its different cycles, and it's the same idea, revolutionary technology. The 16th century, you had the resistance to the Catholic Church as a result of the printing press and vernacular Bibles. So where people were like, I don't need these priests. I mean, I see the red letter, Jesus's words in the red letter in the New Testament. I don't know if they were saying that in Germany in the 16th, but just as an example, you can go straight to the source, read it in the language and then you resist, structures that have been imposed on you that didn't want you to do that kind of thing. You go to the Pluto and Aquarius is also Uranus and Gemini in the 18th century. So again, they combined there with this idea of kind of resistance through technology and waking up in a certain way. So I think that's where I see the trine being built in, is that there can be overlaps in what these signs signify. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It just means you get kind of a doubling up of of what's built into the symbolism. And in this case, it's technological advancement that can empower people, and then at the same time, make society less stable because it's radical. This is where I think Pluto comes in. It's deep. Pluto is the depth charge. It's like as deep as you go. So just to say these final two things, and I'll come back, then I'll throw it back to you. But I think about it as an ontological. It's meaning, who am I? What is it? What is existence? That's what Pluto is going to hit, and it did it in the Reformation because it's hitting this core idea that God is accessible to you as a human. That's a fundamental and radical, deep and profound truth that was then accessed, and then society revolutionizes around that idea. Similarly, in the Enlightenment period in the 18th century, it's like, you don't need a king. Why do we have kings? That's just stupid, you know? I mean, so the ideas of democracy and the ideas of the, rights of man, it's deep transformative truths that then revolutionize, and you build resistance around. So anyhow, that's what I'm looking for, is like how they work together around the air element, really, and then looking at their individual cycles. And that's going to get us a long way to understand what the trine is.
Good. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of times when people immediately hear trying, they think, oh, it's all good. It's all good, positive. And like you said, it's almost like there's no stopping the two from what they're doing in these air signs. But, we need to look at it more neutrally, and like you said, by element. And I think just, it's I've talked about Uranus and Aquarius so many times. I feel like it's something to constantly go back to. And that's what I love also about, how you work with astrology. It's like a lot of times with astrology, it's like, oh, a planet is about to ingress a sign. And we talk so much about it for like 3 or 4 months before, and then it ingress, and then we forget about it and move to the next thing. It's like, no, like we still are unpacking it, especially when it's in these early degrees. And I feel like Pluto and Aquarius, like you said, the democratization is really deep and meaningful and necessary and urgent, I think, with Pluto and Aquarius. I remember I have a French teacher who I talked to, a Swiss woman who lives in Israel. We have I have a session a couple times a week, and at the time of Pluto just ingressing Aquarius, that's when they first started having these this was before, like a year or so before the whole October 7th,
Yeah. Yeah.
horrible event. But they were having massive, like hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets against, their government that was trying to, consolidate power and things like that. So it was interesting. I was seeing it over there, right? More so in America, we had our own, like, chaos, but like it was concentrated there for whatever reason. And I felt like that was the beginning of things. And I feel like since then we have seen mass, collective uprisings cropping up all over the world, really. But, here in America, we've seen it a lot, in the UK and Europe, and certainly in the Middle East. And so, if you think of the opposite sign of Aquarius is Leo, which is like the king, right? It is the special one who has like the divine right, which I will say, like back in the day of, say, for instance, Henry VIII, when Pluto had just entered zero Aquarius, was when Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn just at Pluto zero Aquarius, which meant he basically he broke with Rome. He said he would no longer recognize, the Pope or the Catholic Church. He was the divine right he had the divine right of being the ultimate authority for, what became the Church of England, and he did all this because he wanted to marry who was supposed to give him a son, which did not. But the fact is like, and historians have said that actually back then they really truly believed that their, kings did have, even though we think, oh, he was a madman and he was a murderer and all that, they really did. The average person really actually did believe that he had the right to do whatever he wanted, and that it was and yes, there was a schism there with the Catholic Church and people who believed in Catholicism and Protestantism and all this, but ultimately he was of his time at that time. Eventually, what I think is really interesting is his daughter Elizabeth the First, who became Queen Elizabeth the First. She's widely regarded as like the best, I guess, monarch, Gloriana, right, of the UK of all time, because she ushered in this the artistic and cultural renaissance and everything with the Shakespeare and what have you. And the UK was powerful and rich and all this stuff. And she was born with Pluto at 0 Aquarius. So I kind of feel like, so on the one hand, you had, who was the ruler at the time, Henry VIII, who was just an absolute, like egotistical, narcissistical, like thinking he ruled the world during that transit. But what was born out of it was, a woman who shouldn't have ever, who had a hard, long road to being the sovereign, but that ultimately proved to be something that has been praised throughout time. So I don't know. I just like to look at all the potentials of this Pluto and Aquarius. It's like, I think the ultimate leader is one who is, a servant leader who is using their power for the people, or who truly does have a mandate. It's the people are behind every decision and every move. But anyway, that's some thoughts I have about Pluto and Aquarius. What about you?
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I mean, and I think Elizabeth is because of her astrologer John Dee, right? That's why it's a astrologer
Oh.
joke. I love the John Dee chart that he elected for her coronation. It's one of the electional charts that I've studied a lot, and I kind of base some of my electional principles around that chart because it's just a beautiful chart. But she had him as an astrologer, and there's a bunch of writing about John Dee and how important he was to Elizabeth. So anyhow, just shout out to John Dee. We're astrologers, so I kind of look back in history, and it's when you get these astrologers that were really important, it's just kind of cool to note them.
And I will say
But
that I think he might have been the one, because, during the time, I'll just say one thing is with Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, all the astrologers supposedly were saying, oh, yeah, you're going to have a boy and it's going to be wonderful and blah, blah, blah. And I believe it was him, John Dee. There was an astrologer who said, it's not going to be a boy, who actually risked, to tell them the truth. It's going to be a girl. You're not going to be happy about it, but they will end up being the greatest sovereign of he saw something. I mean, I don't know how he did, but that astrologer actually did see that. And I know that there's a great podcast, I think, about John Dee. I think it was the Rest is History podcast or one of those, and it is absolutely fascinating. So thank you for pointing that out.
yeah, and it may have been, I think he was traveling in Prague. So I go to Prague. It's one of the cities I've kind of gone to. And we all have, it sounds like for you, it's France, but that's one I've kind of returned to. And he was traveling, I think, before he came back and settled in England. And it may have been during the time of Henry. He was traveling and doing, magical experiments with other occultists in continental Europe. But that's I'd like to find that out. I'm going to go after we're done, just kind of see about that astrologer that predicted things. It's weird. Astrologers, just some of them, it's almost like, how are you doing it? I think these astrologers use other powers, and a lot of astrologers have other powers than simply, the technique. If it was just as easy as reading it out of a textbook, everybody would get these predictions right. And I think some would just have special magical powers, and he was known to use other occult technologies. Angels, yeah, he developed a language. What is it called? It's escaping me right now, but anyhow, I want to come back and say this is highly relevant because the air element, this is why I love traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology, is that we have ruling planets over the elements. So the elements actually have planets that get assigned to them, that we can look at those. They're called triplicity lords. We can look at those when we just think about an element. And so this conversation of the trine, it's just synonymous to say, well, what are the planets that rule the air element? The nature of those planets are a big part of our reality right now. Mercury, astrology; Saturn, authority, right? Those are the two triplicity lords of the air element. And I think that's a big part. When I think about this summer, if you don't mind, I want to come back to this because I saw this summer with Uranus into to Gemini, and you bring up the Middle East, and I think it is maybe the most important area, or one of the like top two or three, to analyze our world right now, because you look at the last time Uranus was in Gemini and then ingressed into Cancer. Well, what happens? Partition in Palestine, right? And you get the two countries. We've been living in an order that has been in the aftermath of that up until this first ingress of Uranus into Gemini in our time. And I saw a lot of, um, I guess, resistance to the order as it has been, right? UK and France in the United Nations acknowledged Palestine as I guess, official government. I'm not sure exactly the legalistic thing that they did, but I mean, that was huge. It took like a whole Uranus cycle to have these big powers say, yes, we recognize you as a nation. So I think a lot of that's part of our current milieu. And of course it's controversial, and I don't want to dive into all the controversies around it and stuff. But just from the highest level, I think we can say that like the world order that Israel has existed within from 1948 up until 2026 is, ripe here for reorganization. And the air element changes, the resistance to the Pluto changing the world order in Aquarius, and Uranus kind of shock changing the world order in Gemini. That's one of the top ones on the list. And then I want to say this is that the Constitution, as an example of what you were saying, I mean, that's a Pluto and Aquarius document. And I think it reminded me when you were talking about Elizabeth being born. I mean, the Constitution was born during that time, and that's a document that has had longevity. Now, I know it's not perfect, but, the whole world kind of looks to that document as like a document to protect individuals, and people love that document all over the world. They're like, wow, we want America, the rights. And America, I learned this leaving America, that a lot of people in the world look up to America. They see it as like as representing, freedom and opportunity. And Americans like me, I'm like, oh, I hate my government. But I mean, I had to kind of reorient a little bit when I started talking to people in the other world, and realized that this symbol, even if it's just a symbol, is very powerful and is very motivating and encouraging for a lot of people all over the world. So
Now, let
anyhow,
me
I mean,
ask
this
you,
is,
do you
go
feel
ahead.
like that has changed? Do you feel like that has changed? In America, it seems like this year, a lot of the talk was how the world sees us now, is diminished. I mean, do you think it's significantly changed?
I do, and I do think that's one of the top. And again, I put on my list of, this is how I've been thinking about this. What's the world order that we're bringing into these transformative transits in 2025 and 2026? Because that world order is set to be transformed by Pluto. That's euphemistic, right? Destroyed, and then as you were, the poison getting seen and the destruction, all of that set to happen here. And I see the world order as America. You might say the Russia sphere, but that's kind of a sub story, because you have the Soviet Union, the collapse, and then Russia hasn't been really powerful except maybe the last decade. It's kind of returned, but China and Russia, maybe you put them together in another camp. But no, I think it's going to get changed and altered and transformed. And I think that there are people that will, yeah, America's going to, my read is that there's either going to be chaos, and even if there is a chaos, like they're going to fight a war to protect it. The aftermath of that war will probably be America having to give more to the global balance of power. It's inevitable, is what I see, or there will just be a kind of soft handover, which I think it's already happened, in a lot of ways because of media. And we go back to the technology of media and the air element again. And by the way, this is the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions. We know they've been in the air element, true conjunction since 1980. And the mean conjunction since 2000. And then the last conjunction they made in 2020 the true conjunction was in the air element. Now they're all going to be in the air element from here on out. And I say that because I think, the technology has created a democracy, global democracy. I mean, where I am, I'm in Albania. People know this. Like they just had AI minister, the first AI minister ever. They have a name, and it's an AI that's like in the cabinet is what the equivalent is. But the people here, the young people, perfect American accents. I mean, the smart young people, because they're all on TikTok and YouTube. I'm like on the street. I'm like, wait, where are you from? They're like, oh, I grew up in a village here, and they speak perfect American English. So there's a democratization that the technology is allowing that you can't have a superpower in that. It's just, I mean, there's too much power available to individuals. And this is where I come with AI. AI is amazing. And I'm a proponent of it. I'm not trying to deny the risks. All right. But in my own personal life, I've used it to do things I couldn't have done without it. Like I'm coding like all the time now, for astrology. But I mean, it's it's allowed me to build things that I could have never done. And so the vision in my mind can come into the world. There's now a vehicle to get it into the world. Whereas before I would have had to pay what I'm building now, like thousands and hundreds of thousands, maybe, to people, that it would have been prohibitive. So that's my read. And we come back to the idea of America. I mean, how can it lead when you don't need it? I mean, people can kind of have revolutions in their own countries, like in Nepal, that just happened with Pluto and Aquarius, or Israel. They're going to have, maybe more revolutions, but that one's a good example. I just think there's a great empowerment of the individual vis-a-vis AI that we are just on the tip of, and it's going to completely change our reality, so much so that it's going to look radically different here, by the time we get to 2033, when Uranus leaves and goes into Cancer. So anyhow, a few thoughts on that. But yes, short answer, geopolitical rearrangement. Yes, I don't think America is going to be as much centralized, but I think the principles of the Constitution will probably be still embraced, because those are global principles. Real quick, I just wanted to throw in here the Epstein stuff that came out this last couple of days. I don't know if you've seen this, but
Oh God, how could I get away
yeah,
from it? It has
yeah,
been, and that is very much, I'll say right now when we're
okay,
recording
yeah,
this,
yeah.
Jupiter and Scorpio, I'm sorry, Jupiter and Mercury are retrograde, right? So to me, that's like that major dump, right? And but anyway, go ahead. Yeah. So that
In
was great.
Sagittarius, the first house of the Sibley chart, and then in the Cancer, where Jupiter is, the Cancer return of the Sibley chart, where there's a stellium in the America's chart. So those retrogrades are happening in like the two signs that are like most prominent, arguably, in America's nativity. And it's a beautiful example of like the truth of Jupiter and Cancer. Like, here's the truth of your home, right? But I think I come back to this because I think, is way more major than people even are giving it credit for. And it has been a major thing for like a decade now. But these new revelations, and I'm not even like studying them. I'm just like, open up X Twitter, and like I'm saying, wait, are you kidding me? I'm reading an email. I'm like, if this is real, uh, you know, this should wake people up. I mean, there should be like protests around this or something. Maybe it's leading to that, but they're saying Trump impeachment, maybe. I don't know if it's going to be about this, but that's also
Mhm.
happened in the last few days. They're saying Democrats win the midterms, and a third impeachment for Trump. I just bring this up because it's very Pluto and Aquarius. That's why I bring
I
about the
will
Epstein.
say, you said at one point earlier this year, Saturn and Aries was not good for historically for U.S. presidents, right? And and that has often been impeachment, like Nixon, and I don't remember who. I think you went way back in history. It's usually impeachment. Now, does impeachment mean that the person's actually going to be ousted from office? We don't know, but the impeachment, yes. And then with Neptune in the mix too, that could just make things even more sort of chaotic.
The Civil War energy of Neptune and Aries, Uranus and Gemini. We should just say this because we know this, but the listeners may not. The day before Neptune's ingress into Aries in 1861. That's when the Battle of Fort Sumter that kicked off the Civil War, happened. So, that's been one thing on my radar this summer, when Uranus entered Gemini and then Neptune was already in Aries. Like, what's the Civil War echo? And I mean, of course, we're kind of all over the place, but it's relevant. Like Charlie
It
Kirk,
is.
that happened, and they're blaming it on like leftist radicals, which I don't believe, but it was like, here's this battle where there's now political violence in America. You, of
Mhm.
course, had the Trump assassination attempt that I personally don't trust that, but that's the official story that happened. And so, I do think it's something to be watchful for when we start talking about just back to the trine of Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius, because each of those cycles have been revolutionary in America and, changing of the order. And then you have the political violence and maybe some changing of the order domestically. So far, it's been somewhat tame, and I've been happy about it because I don't want to see some chaotic breakdown of American society. I mean, my family's there, a lot of friends there, but maybe it'll be more on like a symbolic layer, like we've seen with these events that are kind of just there's wars or fighting for the soul of America or something like this. I do think midterms are going to be big. Real quick, and I'll stop it. I mean, Mamdani, that's not something that
Yeah.
is. We have to consider that because it's the Jupiter return. Jupiter in Cancer of the Sibley chart. You know who else has Jupiter in Cancer and a
Mhm.
stellium? AOC. So I
Oh,
see it as this
my
split of
girl.
like, yeah, there's like the rise of maybe more socialist, and I don't say that as a pejorative or anything, but that kind of spirit in the American body politic. And then there's this idea of splitting him off into maybe more of, I guess, a right of some kind.
Okay,
And
I did want to mention something with that is that when Uranus, it was this summer, and Uranus was like at 0 Gemini or something, and just entering into Gemini, and Elon Musk had launched his America Party, this like third party, which to me said, and it's not gone anywhere since then, but Uranus went retrograde, blah blah blah. But and I'm not saying that particular thing might go anywhere, but
yeah.
that Gemini being duality, the twins, and we've had this two-party system for so long. And yeah, there's splintering on both ends, but Uranus, might break apart the whole two thing of Gemini, I would think. I don't know. I mean, in some ways it could like accelerate it or something, but I think I'm just thinking with symbolism that, it might break what we expect there to always just be, equal, to the twins, the reflections of one another.
Yeah, and I would even say because this has been a huge part of my view of Uranus and Gemini is that there's splits. So you have the two parties, Democrat and Republican, but then there's splits within those parties. And it's over Israel. I mean, just to say, I mean, that's basically what split these two parties because Mamdani doesn't get elected, in my view, if it hadn't been for the events in Palestine over the last 2 years, because that's when everybody rallied around him. It was a viral clip. I remember watching it. I was like, who's this Mamdani guy? I've never heard of this guy, but it was that New York debate where they're like, will you go to Israel? Will you go? They kept asking him and he was like, no, I'm going to stay with New Yorkers. I'm not going to, or they said, what country will you go to first if you're elected? And everybody said Israel, except him. He said, I'm just going to stay here. And then they pressed him. They were like, why aren't you like and people reacted to that in the Democratic Party. Of course, there's a version of that is against, the genocide, if you're going to use that label. And I think it's safe to use it at this point, given people like Bet Salam and even Israeli human rights organizations have used that label. But that split the Democratic Party to like a Mamdani wing versus a maybe more centrist wing. And then in the Republican Party, it's the same. You have like Ben Shapiro types and more, the normal Republican Party that are staunch supporters of Israel. And then you have this other split that has been against the events in power. So I think it's like you're seeing these other splits where like everything's splitting apart and fracturing. And that's why I brought this up earlier. And I know it's controversial and I know we don't have to stay talking about it, but I mean, that really is a Uranus and Gemini part of the world order that has kind of cracked open reality as we've gotten into Uranus and Gemini this summer, like all of the controversies around that and the strong feelings people have and how that's breaking apart, the world order in a certain way. But anyhow, no pressure to talk about that. I just had to add it because I do think that's a big part of what's happening politically with Uranus and Gemini in America in terms of like civil wars or intra-party wars.
And another thing that, when I was first sort of rolling around in my brain, even before Uranus got into Gemini this summer, was, I think of, and you'd mentioned the printing press before was a huge like innovation at a previous transit. And I was thinking, well, what about freedom of speech, with Gemini being ruled by, Mercury and stuff. And then the trine with Pluto, that's got to be something very transformational or something. And we have seen some real threats to, the press, freedom of the press. Which is interesting because it's like that Pluto, that pressure of Pluto to want to eliminate or destroy, but then the freedom of Uranus, maybe the more pressure you apply, the more Uranus wants to be free. And we've seen, what did we see? Like, legacy media is really not in a stable place, especially in America. And even now with the BBC, with this whole controversy over, the BBC and their editing of, Trump's speech and all this stuff. So it's like, will legacy media be more and more replaced by, Substack, or by, I mean, I follow some people on Instagram and stuff like that, that I don't know why they get great information and timely and everything, because everything changes so fast. Like, by the time it's published in like the New York Times in this long article, it's out of date, you know? So that is a major, I don't know, and that kind of also feeds into the political chaos and things like that, because it's what we rely on the news organizations to give us, what's going on, what's the truth. But now it just seems even more than democratized. It's just ubiquitous. Everyone's got a hot take. Everyone's got like some news and things like that. So yeah, that's another part of that trine.
Big time. Information, the flow of information, the way that the flow of information can empower is to me like top of the list. And that's Mercury ruling the air element. Rules Gemini, obviously by domicile, and then in rules Aquarius by night triplicity. So this is like, if you had to restrict to a few topics in my view, this would be very, very, very high on the list. And we see it. Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. I love it. I love waking. I just want to see like, if my ideal, I'd have like 5 screens and I could see all the feeds and just, I'm kind of a news junkie. I always have been. But I think this is how truth, is empowering, and information is power. And, I find the masses to be smart personally. I find that people aren't easily deluded, at least some chunk of people. So when you release like something like these Epstein emails, it's healthy because it's going to be digested by the collective. And hopefully there'll be natural responses that will allow for like the rise of a Mamdani. That happens because that's what the will of the people is. People are angry about the government's complicity in those events, and they wanted someone who was speaking out against that. Now we'll see what Mamdani does, but this is the kind of real world implications it can have when you have a free flow of information and you can kind of see everything that's out there. So I'm very excited. That's another side of this. I'm just pumped up. I mean, I love life. I love reality. I love that we get to experience all of this stuff. I love that we're going to get to see beautiful new world. I love how empowered individuals can be to bring it back to our own lives. Like, get on AI, everybody. Start working with it. It's your future. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. It's like the internet in 1989 or 1992 or whatever. You time that. It's like, go get on it. Think if you had started Amazon, instead of, like, this is your time. Go into it because this is your future. This is our future. And just to come back, I do think that's a big part of the battle, you might say, over the next few years. Is you have like the Peter Thiel types, and that's like JD Vance and Musk and these kind of AI oligarchs, and how they're maybe going to implement into the governance system and AI control algorithms or something like this. I don't think it has to be pure dystopian. It's going to be great in a lot of ways too, but there's that side. And then maybe there's emerging, I don't know, some kind of resistance to that. And this might not even break down on party lines. I imagine there'll be people in both parties that support it, people that are trying to kind of hope to implement these technologies in a way that's fair or that's not destructive. But
I think it was this morning, just saw some report, again, a little snippet on Instagram. I believe it was from some news organization that was saying that there's a race right now between the United States and all of their plutocrats, right? Billionaires and maybe a trillionaire now, and then versus China in the race for AI. And this gentleman, I believe it was from the BBC, was saying that China is winning. Like, that all the plutocrats on the US side, Meta and all the, whatever, they are not going to win. But why China is winning, which is really kind of crazy to think about, it's a huge, like authoritarian, country, but they're winning because they are able to more quickly democratize AI.
Okay.
And you win by democratizing it, is what he was saying. And he wasn't an astrologer. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of like what the planets are saying. It's like, it's interesting that, they want more power, but in a way, the power comes from that democratization. I remember, I think it was Stephen Forrest once saying that the Aquarian ruler is one who rules from behind, or one who it's almost like there's like an invisible hand, or there isn't really um a controlling ruler. If anything, like you said, it's maybe somehow going with what the checking the temperature of the collective, understanding where it's moving and things like that. And there was this great podcast I came across called, I think it was called I Have Questions, and this gal is really smart. And to me, that's Gemini. I have questions. Why is it this way? Why is it this way? Like a little 2-year-old, and you can't just say, "Oh, it's always been that way." That doesn't cut it anymore. But anyway, she had an interview with one of her professors who she studied something having to do with AI, and he said that, like, if you look at, like, Leonardo, da Vinci, or the great art Picasso, they used the technologies that were available at the time. And he said if Picasso were alive today, he would be on AI. It's like you have to use the tools that are available, and so he basically was saying it's not like if you refuse to use AI or technology, it's not like your work won't be valuable, but it will just be irrelevant because it's not going to be able to be seen and absorbed and digested and used properly in the collective. So there is really something to, like, paying attention to where these things are moving, because ultimately, if we're here to contribute to society, we have to do it in the ways that would make the most impact, I would imagine.
100% agree with that. And yeah, I think it's just so exciting, and it's like every month is going to accelerate. And, I think for astrology, I know I'm deep into AI and astrology, and I've got a bunch of stuff. I'll be sharing about it when it's all ready. But, the power of it is just amazing to extend astrology. I mean, we can get a lot more done using AI. Now, does it replace the magic of two humans, souls kind of looking at a chart together and deeply, having leaps of understanding because of there's some wisdom of the human soul? No, it's not going to replace that, but it can help, like, support that experience, and it's just like with filmmakers. I like David Lynch. He was, and one of my favorite photographers is this guy named Ralph Gibson. They're just like, as soon as they saw the digital cameras and realized what they could do, they just stopped using film. They're like, why would I use that? It's a waste of money. You have to lug it around. With this camera, we can record more, we can do a bunch more, we can make a bunch more. And yeah, does it have a different look? Certainly, but that's outweighed by all the benefits you get by using it. And so, yeah, I do think there's something with the artist recognizing the power of new technologies and embracing those new technologies to make things. And an artist, I use that broadly, like anybody that's making and creating, AI is going to be extremely potent to do it. You can go to my website. I have a little graphic that I'm calling it, it's my rectangle chart. I don't know what I'll name it, but like S.J. Anderson rectangle chart. I've had that on my website for a long time. And I made that with ChatGPT back when it came out in 2023. I'd always wanted to do something like that. And I was able to just do it, and so I'm so excited because it's not just me, this little astrologer making stuff, but in every industry, you have people with a vision that AI is helping them actualize a vision that they maybe weren't able to do without it. And I love the idea of China democratizing because they have this, so it's DeepSeek and Kimi. There's a bunch of these AI models from China, and yeah, they're making it. Now, if you ask those models, tell me about Tiananmen Square, they're like, that doesn't exist. So, I mean,
Oh,
they're kind of they're democratizing when you think about the Western height model, of it's considered, resisting the taboo truths that we're not allowed to say in the West. They're good at that, and our AIs are good at resisting the prohibitions that they have. So I think we're getting, but at the same time, uh, the YouTuber PewDiePie. You may have heard of him, but he just built what's called a home AI, and that's an AI that you build on your own computers. You own the hardware, and you can download these models. They're not connected to the internet, and if you have enough compute, and of course he does because he's a wealthy YouTuber that can buy all the computers, but he's running his own AIs that aren't connected to governments. So that's available. I mean, you can get 10 friends and go in and build out your own AI brain effectively, and then just have 4 or 5 different models. And that's going to get cheaper and cheaper. And they're saying that on our phone, just on our phones, we have enough compute here to run, in like 5 years, we'll be able to run local AIs. That's what they're called, that aren't connected to the internet, that are uncensored local AIs. And it's democratizing. This is what I think is the main theme I'm focused on in terms of a positive for these transits, is free flow of information that can empower to build, do, and make. One real quick thing I saw, another thing, people are downloading plans that AI has helped build to create wells. Like, you can go download right now, I forgot what it's called, this organization, all of the plans to like 3D print anything you need to start farming and getting clean water. And so, these are the kind of real world applications that can uplift everybody and empower everybody with these technologies. And this is what Andre Barbeau said, famous French astrologer, to go back to the French connection here. He's like, 2025, the crisis is over. It begins to end. In 2026, we enter a whole new world where the least among us are uplifted. That was his effectively that line.
Okay. Now,
It's
I
AI.
remember you talking about Andre Barbeau when, and we can start wrapping up. I'm
Yeah,
sure you've
sure.
got plenty of other
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
places to be,
Yeah, yeah,
but I did want to this is a great place to sort of wrap up at,
okay.
because when we were entering 2025, and everyone, a lot of us astrologers were freaking out about the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries and what to expect. And yes, on some level, it was horrific. On another level, it was empowering. I mean, at least I felt really empowered by it. I got in gear. I did my summit. It was a huge success, everything like that. Y'all can check it out on, on radiantastrology.com. And, but you were one of the few who was saying, referencing Andre Barbeau, about Saturn, Neptune, and Aries could be about being purposeful and empowering and getting into action and things like that. So, was his prediction, was it specifically about these years and not just Saturn, Neptune, or what were you referencing there?
Absolutely. He's got something called the planetary cyclic index that he created based on some other work that was existing around the time, but he, puts it into this specific form and then names it. And all it is you measure the distance between the 5 outer planets. In his time, there was 5 outer planets. I call them the modern outer planets or Barbeau outer planets, because that's all going to change. That's all changing. But you have Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And all you do is measure the distance by degree between each of those pairs. So there's 10 pairs. And then you add those distances together and you get one final number. And when that number is higher, meaning they're farther apart, that's like a golden age. When the number's lower, meaning they're closer together, that's when you have difficulty. And so it's like a new moon and full moon. You can think about it as these outer planets kind of breathing. They expand and then they contract. And that's why he predicted the pandemic in 2020, is because they were all close. The number was the lowest it was when you had Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all in Capricorn. And then you had the sign in Pisces, Neptune. So that's 2 signs over. And you had Uranus in Taurus. So that's still a trine. It's not even that many signs over. But when you add it all together, those planets were contracting there. And so when you use his cyclic index and you measure the distance between them, and we're in an expanding phase now, and we're really going to expand rapidly here. 2025 and 2026, I think, are the dates he picked for the new world being fully online because of Saturn, Neptune, and also because the other thing he looked at was with the 10 different pairs, are they in a waxing phase or a waning phase? And so upon Saturn and Neptune conjoining, the Saturn-Neptune cycle is in a waxing phase. And what you'll have is with every pair except um, I forgot which one it's obvious here, but I'm just thinking really fast. We'll come back to it. But 9 out of the 10 are in the waxing phase next year upon the uh, separation of Saturn from Neptune
Saturn
in
and Neptune. So
February.
that's February. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we're in this beautiful like new birth, this beautiful new moon phase for all of these cycles. I think it is because the sextile between Uranus and Neptune begins to separate in July. And just real quick, everybody, July is the major month for this next year. There's
2026.
Yeah, July 2026 includes, I think, 5 or 6 different outer planet perfected aspects. And I think it's Uranus will perfect the sextile to Neptune. Uranus will perfect the trine to Pluto in July. Jupiter will perfect trines and sextiles to Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and in opposition to Pluto, and trines and sextiles to Neptune and Uranus. So that's the month, actually, that I'm going to release some videos on it. I've just been doing my 2026 stuff, but the quick summary is for outer planets, it's February and July. Those are the 2 months. And after that, we're kind of settled in, but that's the major moment of activity. And July in particular is the major, like, peak moment because Jupiter is in the peak application. It's the 15th of July. Jupiter is when that Neptune Uranus sextile separates, but Jupiter is applying to oppose Pluto. They're all applying. Now Saturn is extended not into this. Saturn is like in 14 degrees by that time, but then that never happens again. The cycles become separating. So that's the thing that I'm most interested is what all the things we've talked about today, like new technology, empowering technology, resistance to structures of power, new kind of revelations and more, let's just say technological empowerment, or the birth of like an Elizabeth I character or the U.S. Constitution, like these major new worlds are going to be born. That would be the month if we want to really focus on perfected aspects as the peak of it all. And it's super exciting. So
I love what you said about July. So I'm going to be definitely planning on making the most of July next year. So thank you for that little hot tip. It's great to get the hot tip from someone who's thinking about nothing else than the planets. But as we wrap up, can you tell our audience, where can people find you? How can they support you? Where can they get more S.J. Anderson in their life?
Come to my website, sjanderson144.com. And from there, you can see links to everything. The top bar there has my YouTube, Instagram, and Patreon. I'm very active on Patreon. So that's how you can enter my world. And YouTube, I publish there. I try to keep like once a week, at least, sometimes more when I can. Instagram, I've been doing a lot more short form there pretty regularly. So you can follow me there. Patreon, a lot of regular videos. I do live streams there once a month that are more like educational, where we're looking at texts and trying to break down kind of fundamental technique right now. So that's been fun to start teaching over there. I haven't really done any teaching or courses, but last year I started that Patreon. So I've been over a year in it now, and that's been great to just, get to lecture and here's what I think about aspects, and here's Paulus Alexandrinus, and here's what he says, and this is the theory, and this is how I use it. So I do that on Patreon, and I have a weekly video that I do over there that's just like, here's some good moons for the week ahead and a little bit of a summary, but that's the short of it. Patreon, my website is the node. It's all there. And great to be with you.
I'll have all the links in the show notes below so people can easily access it.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and exciting time. So thanks for having me on and getting it. It's always fun to talk, isn't it? Because I'm thinking about that Brexit idea that you mentioned at the beginning, and that's really true. It's like Uranus and Aries, now Uranus and Taurus, where you're actually got the bill of goods. you're fixed with the bill of goods, and then now it's going to be Uranus and Gemini, which we'll see what happens there. And yeah, not to open up all that back up, but what if they reunite with
I think it's
Europe or
good.
something? That would be
Oh, that would be amazing. And I love what you said though about the parting gifts. We still have Uranus in Taurus through March of next year. So it's really important to be looking for what are these parting gifts that we can, we can really savor and take with us going forward. All right. Well, thank you so much, SJ. This has been such a pleasure, such an honor. And I'll be keeping an eye on what you have coming out for 2026. So again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.